as a typical rule, as a typical philosophy for when conducting myself online, because I really am putting myself under a microscope, is to just be honest. You can always tell when someone's forcing something, and I think I just am very fortunate to have a really real enthusiasm for a subject matter. People find it engaging because they can tell that I actually am getting really excited about something, and I have very strong reactions to certain things. I'd say just be honest and be kind. Don't misrepresent yourself, because people will always come with the receipts.
3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the Reactorverse Podcast. I am thrilled today to be joined by my good friend, Kyle Katarn of the Kyle Katarn channel, a reactor that I've known for a couple years now and that I'm happy to have on as one of our early guests for the show. Kyle, thank you so much for being here.
Hello there. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Again, like I said, thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy to have you as kind of like one of the first guests that we got to talk to about the ins and outs, because a unique thing about this is that I've never interviewed a channel has a specific brand, that focuses on a specific IP, so to speak.
I am a bit of a niche, yes.
Yeah, there are some of you out there, but I've talked to channels before, and usually it's the type that covers all types of shows, movies, stuff like that. But your focus is Star Wars, and that's such a
Right.
unique space to kind of even work and thrive in. So I kind of wanted to go down, your channel, the history of it, the process of it, and but also a little bit beyond that, because Star Wars is such an important thing to yourself and lots of people in this space. I kind of wanted to start from the beginning, which is, I believe you are originally from New Zealand.
Right. Yes,
correct?
I am.
So could you tell us, about your history there growing up? Like, how long were you there? What point did you kind of come to the U.S.?
Sure. So yes, I was born in New Zealand. I grew up there. I moved to America in 2001. So shortly after the big millennium. That's one of my last memories of being in New Zealand is having a big millennium party with everybody. Yeah. And then we were on a plane in January. But no, I first saw Star Wars in New Zealand in 1997 when the releases came out, and that was kind of the beginning of my journey as a nerd. But when I moved to America with my family, I had to leave all of my friends behind and all the connections that I had made. And as a young person, these things are very important. And Star Wars was kind of the constant during that move, that I was able to escape back into the galaxy far, far away and not really think about the fact that I was a preteen in a new school, in a new continent, in a different part of the world. I didn't have any friends yet. And that can be pretty daunting. Also, I had a goofy accent. I thought it was cool. Kids think that stuff. Kids think anything is goofy these days. But I think that's kind of where I grew into a super Star Wars fan. It was always there for me when I needed something familiar in a time when a lot of things were kind of in flux. Moving to a new country can be hard.
Right. Were you exposed to again while you're in New Zealand? Were you exposed to a lot of American pop culture beyond Star Wars? Was that readily available to you? Just kind of
I mean, all of the big movies would also release down there as well. And I think Hollywood was considered kind of the gold standard for filmmaking, and New Zealand had a very big film industry of its own at the time. But I feel even then, the films and the TV shows released there were always compared to their American counterparts. This always seemed to be setting a standard for all of their shows. And so, of course, that's what all of us kids would be into. We were watching the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies. I remember were huge at the time. Those were dropping. Everyone was talking about those. Jumanji was a huge hit. It wasn't just Star Wars, but Star Wars was definitely among them. We had our own local stuff going on. There's a lot of cool horror movies coming out from Peter Jackson at the time. Hercules: The Legendary Journeys was being filmed a couple blocks from where I lived. Same with Xena Warrior Princess. Wow. So we had some cool stuff of our own going on too. But yeah, no, we loved American pop culture. It was kind of this fancy thing. I remember one time my dad got a long distance phone call related to work, and he talked to someone who was in America. And when he hung up, he like turned to his coworker and he was like, I just talked to someone that was in America. And he was all impressed. It's like, ooh, wow. Like, so it was kind of a fun thing, you know?
Yeah. That's funny though that you mentioned it. So you came in 2001. That's kind of like right before the Lord of the Rings films sort of popped off.
Yep, that's right. I knew about them before I moved because my Aunt Zoe actually worked on those films.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was
That's
telling
awesome.
us that she had begun work on an adaptation of The Lord of the Rings and that it was going to be huge. And I think I underappreciated exactly what she was telling me at the time because they went
Yeah.
on to become like my favorite films pretty much. Like I love The Lord of the Rings so much.
Right, right.
On my YouTube channel, I often say that Star Wars are the second greatest films ever made. I'm talking about Lord of the Rings every time.
That's a high praise. High praise for just looking at what's around
Absolutely,
you.
absolutely. But I was talking. We were being told by my aunt about this new movie coming out, and we were like, "Okay, cool. That sounds very exciting for you. I'm sure we'll see it at some point." Then we moved to America, and the trailer hits a couple months later, and I was like, "Oh, I should have stayed. I should have stayed. I could have been in that movie. Like, I could have been a cute Hobbit child or something. Like, oh, I was this close, this close."
Right. You mentioned Star Wars. I mean, coming over to the U.S., that being a big part of like what you took with you. You said you kind of discovered Star Wars in 1997. Was that? Do you remember? Like, do you remember the kind of specific first experience you had? Because like for me, I actually don't. I don't remember when I first saw Star Wars for the first time in my life. It was just kind of something that was always there with me. I think through my father, who probably showed it to me when I was very young, and it's just something that I kind of like always sort of had around me. But for you, was there a specific inception point?
For me, I've always viewed it myself as having had two separate inception points. One of them I barely remember, and it's very, very similar to your memory. Going to the theater with my dad to see one of the originals when I was maybe 3 years old, 2 or 3 years old. And it's an early memory, and I don't remember much, and I couldn't tell you a lick of what happened in the theater because I was a 3-year-old. So that's inception point number one. Inception point number two was when I was the one saying, "Hey, Dad, let's go see this." And it was coming from me versus him taking me to it. And that was in 1997 when the original trilogy special editions were released and Star Wars was suddenly back in the theater. This was only like 3 years before The Phantom Menace came out. So this was like the last hurrah for us because it was still a secret that that was happening. I think the news broke shortly after the re-release in theaters. But I went to go see it, and I saw A New Hope in the theater. And then a couple weeks later, we saw Empire Strikes Back, and it was like there was no going back after that. Right. I was rewatching our old VHS tapes nonstop. I had the sticker books. I like discovered that merch existed for this. Like we went to the toy store, and after having seen Star Wars, I started recognizing the stormtroopers on the shelf, and I was like, wait a minute. And I started collecting in that time. And I also, this is kind of funny. This is kind of like a third inception point because by this time I was absolutely a Star Wars fan. I'd seen it in the theater, but after I moved to America, I have extended family in America. That's why we moved here, and I had cousins that had been living here for a while. And one of my cousins, an older cousin, came over to the house one day after hearing that I was really into Star Wars, and he handed me a copy of Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, and said, "There's more than just the movies, right? There's all these books. The stories keep going." And so that was like the final kicking off point for me. Once I had that book in my hand, I read it cover to cover, picked up Dark Force Rising, followed by The Last Command, and then all of them, all the Legends books. I consumed everything I could get my hands on, and at that point, I think it was nothing else could come close to my enthusiasm for like that particular set of stories.
Right. Yeah. So that's going to ask because like it kind of happened pretty quickly that you became sort of obsessed with the IP, the culture around it, like the extended canon at the time that existed. Was there a point where you kind of had that sort of self-awareness of like this is a large part of like who I am? This is like a part of like my identity and part of like how I want to like kind of present my taste in the world.
I feel like I had that realization pretty late on in the process of becoming a super fan, to the point where I try not to define myself by it anymore. I really kind of try to throw myself at things outside of my interest for Star Wars, just for my own benefit, so I can feel like I'm well-rounded as a person. Because it's very easy for me to be like, oh yeah, 99% of my brain power goes to Star Wars all the time. And that's, you got to take a step back and look at yourself. And I want to be able to say, I also enjoy this and I also am into this. Right. But I think by the time I had the self-awareness to realize, wow, I am like completely wrapped up in Star Wars. Like I live and breathe this stuff. I think it had been the case for many years. During the formative stage, I wasn't even aware of it because I was so invested in what I was reading, what I was watching. I wasn't really taking the time to realize the effect it was having on my development necessarily, because I was definitely very young when I first entered into this. People said it was a phase being into Star Wars. It's been 30 years. All right. It's a pretty long phase.
Yeah. So, so prior to having the channel and everything in those, that kind of era of Star Wars, after the prequels, before the Disney acquisition, did you have any sort of creative outlets with it? Did you were on any forums? Were you making any original content like based around Star Wars?
So, my mother, was a cartoonist, and she draws little panel comics, strip comics. Like that's just sort of how she's been expressing herself for my entire life. And she taught me to draw, and I do the same thing. And when I was a little kid, I would draw little panel comics of stormtroopers and Star Destroyers and Jedi, and some of the earliest drawings that I still have seen, like in my adult, because my mom saves a bunch of my old stuff. And some of the earliest drawings of mine were Star Wars drawings. So like immediately I started emulating it. And I think a lot of my artistic development came from seeing Star Wars and being inspired by this entire imaginary world and this entire imaginary galaxy.
Yeah.
And so I would draw an ATST Walker, and then I would draw an AT-AT, and I'm picturing this specific drawing. I then drew like 5 different variants that didn't exist, and I was like, well, what if they went through the desert? What if they went through the jungle? And like, it was basically I was banging out concept art, and I was like 4 years old, and I didn't know what that was at the time, but it absolutely inspired me to become more creative. Because I always wanted to draw like my mom, but I never knew what to draw. And then as soon as I watched Star Wars, I was like, oh, I know what to draw.
Yeah. Is that still a hobby that you have at all? Like sketching, drawing?
I haven't drawn nearly as much as I would like. I filled sketchbooks up all throughout high school and college. But in the last few years, the thing about YouTube is it takes up a lot of your time.
Right.
And I'm hoping to get back into a couple of hobbies down the road. But yeah, I found new outlets in the meantime. Like YouTube is a great way to allow yourself to be creative and expressive as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was the same way. Like I drew like a lot of anime throughout high school. Like that was like a big thing that I kind of like discovered in middle school, early high school, and so that was how I expressed myself for like a good chunk of time until like I graduated and I got into video editing. That's when I started making like AMVs, like anime music videos. That's how I started getting to like the field I'm in now. Yeah, there's natural progression for that. Like you say though, for like the YouTube channel, like when you started it, did you have any kind of specific goal or trajectory in mind when you started it? Like, were you inspired by just like, others that were doing it at the time?
Yeah. So I would say that it was never an intended career path. It was always kind of a fun side project, like a hobby when I started it. So long before I ever started a YouTube channel, I was a fan of reactions. I think in 2015, when the Force Awakens trailer came out, maybe it was 2014, that was just like a cultural zeitgeist moment. All these reactions got posted. And I think the first reaction videos I ever saw were to that Force Awakens teaser. And that kind of opened the door for me that this whole genre of content exists, reactions. And I think the reason I was so drawn to it was because I was always someone who was so intensely passionate about an area. For me, it was Star Wars. That no one else, like I had friends that liked Star Wars, but no one was really on my level, you know? All of my friends think Star Wars is cool, and oh yeah, I have a favorite movie, but they don't have an opinion on the crew complement of an Imperial 2 class Victory Star Destroyer. Like it's not a thing. That's too deep for them. Yeah. And so I would find these people that would nerd out in these reactions, and I felt like this kinship with them, and it made me feel like I feel like there isn't a cheesy way to say this. It made me feel less alone in my nerdiness. Like to see it mirrored in another face, like out there in the world, like there's more of us. There's a bunch of us out there, and we all feel the same feelings when we're watching these things. And it's a real connectedness. It really is. And so I became a fan of the Blind Wave channel. I think they were really my inspiration to start doing it myself. They were my role models, particularly Eric, because he had a lot of the same takeaways and thoughts that I do when I'm watching Star Wars. I was like, wow, we say the same stuff. And I was like, you know what? I could do this. I could do what they're doing. I had a bit of a Star Wars collection already, so I was like, I got some stuff I could decorate a background with, and I feel like I have thoughts to share when I watch things. And Star Wars Rebels was airing at the time back in 2017, and my first reaction video that I posted was to Twin Sons, Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Maul. And it got a big reception. I wasn't expecting like really any views at all. And it got picked up pretty quick. I think it trended and it got a couple thousand. And that was really encouraging to me. I was like, okay. And there was no looking back from there. But I was working full time. I had a job. I had a whole other thing going on. And this was just sort of to fill up my weekends and like have some fun. Find a way to connect with other people about Star Wars. That's really what it is trying to enter the next level of participation for that connectedness that we feel when we watch reactions.
Right.
And then, as everybody knows, in 2020, everything shut down for a while.
Yeah.
So my day job was that I was running security for an Irish bar that shut during the pandemic and did not open back up again. So not only was I out of work for a couple months, there wasn't really anything to return to. So with all this time on my hands and sitting on unemployment, I was like, well, you know what? Let's put all of my time and energy into the YouTube channel. And I was able to grow it tremendously. And I really think that I got lucky in that the situation was just a confluence of perfect events. I was out of work and therefore had the time to put into it. A bunch of new Star Wars content had just come out, so there was plenty of things to actually like talk about and have a discourse on. And I had a captive audience because everyone else was stuck at home too, watching YouTube all day. So that's why the numbers were like so strong for it. It really was a good time to start taking it seriously, I think. And the channel has benefited from it to the point where now I do this full time, and I'm loving it. Honestly, it's a really fulfilling and creative way to support yourself, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's again, like the fantastic, journey of like how you started and kind of, what the pandemic sort of did for a lot of channels, which is like just give everyone that outlet, like you said, to find people to feel less alone in what you're watching, how you're experiencing the world, how you kind of even just cope with like things around you and the stuff you enjoy. I think it is like a really important sense of like community that people are able to find through these channels like yourself and Blind Wife and others.
There's a well-documented correlation, I think, between times of hardship and a boost to the entertainment industries. Like during the Great Depression, one of the only industries that did not suffer was the film industry, because it was very important to everybody that there was still a level of escapism and entertainment being provided to the people when everyone was like starving, basically. And I think the pandemic was kind of that same kind of psychology at play, in that everyone kind of needed a pick-me-up. Everyone's tuning in. Everyone's enthusiastically taking in new content. And all of the content creators are encouraged by that. And therefore the content, it's reflected in that, in the quality of it. So like it was something meaningful to people. I think I've gotten DMs from random audience members before saying, hey, your content has really helped me through hard times, through lockdown, for example.
Yeah. Exactly. So I want to ask you, when you started the channel, did you have to kind of learn any technical know-how to get started, like in terms of like just cameras, like computer editing, anything like that? Was there a learning curve for you?
Yes, the short answer is yes, and I'm still doing that. I threw myself in without doing too much research first. I just connected a USB webcam to the computer that I was using for any other daily stuff, and I had to learn what OBS was. I had to learn how recording worked, and it was all done on the fly. I would say that copyright and the rules and regulations around DMCA and fair use was the most eye-opening of experiences. Trying to react to copyrighted content, there are certain things that you have to do correctly, and if you don't, your videos get blocked. Right. And I got a lot of videos blocked early on, without quite knowing what I was doing wrong. And so that was really kind of a trial and error process, but we got there in the end.
Yeah. as I would know, because I helped out a little bit with that.
Yes, exactly. You got us there in the end is really how I should say that.
I also want to ask about your name though. So the name Kyle Katarn, I think as a lot of Star Wars fans would know, is a name from the extended canon, of Star Wars content from the previous extended universe. So I want to ask, what was the reasoning behind picking that name specifically as your moniker for this?
I'm a big fan of Kyle Katarn, I think is the simplest explanation. The Dark Forces games and their sequels, Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy, were some of the first Star Wars games that I played. Like, that was the first foray into gaming. For context, I'm not really a gamer. I did not play video games growing up. I think other than a couple shooters on a PC, like Quake and things like that. My parents wouldn't let me have consoles. They were blind to the fact that you can play games on a PC. So I was able to sneak Unreal Tournament in there.
Right.
But I didn't touch a controller until I was about 18 years old. So I'm not exactly classically trained when it comes to that. And so as soon as it was gaming time, Star Wars games, naturally. I'm the Star Wars fan. And Kyle Katarn was my guy. He's so cool. And I grew a beard. People told me that I looked like Kyle Katarn, and I was like, you know what? That's a perfect name for this. And I will leave it somewhat mysterious, but people ask me all the time, they're like, is your name actually Kyle Katarn? And my response is, man, my name's not even Kyle. It's not even close. They think the Bendu's name is Ben, which I see the logic there, but it's not.
Yeah.
No, our names are a secret. We're like Daft Punk.
Right. When you started, you said around the time of like The Force Awakens, the kind of wake of that being like when you started the channel back in like, I believe it was 2017 when you first
2017 is when I
it.
posted my first video. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, the buzz around that first trailer and the movie coming out just kind of ignited the Star Wars culture in a way that hadn't been ignited in
it was a revitalizing for sure.
Yeah. Do you remember what was your personal experience kind of like being in that kind of wave of everything at the time as you were trying to start this up yourself for your channel?
So it's one of those do you remember where you were when Disney bought Lucasfilm? And I do. Right. I remember exactly where I was. I was at band practice with my bandmates downtown, and I got the alert on my phone. And so I stepped outside to have a cigarette, and I was talking. And so we all stepped out, and I told them. And then we argued for 2 hours about the prequel trilogy and didn't play a note. We didn't play any music that day. And then we all went home. So that's my recollection of it. I remember exactly where I was. And I was excited. I was like, hell yeah, we're getting new movies. We're getting more of it. And my guitarist was like, Star Wars has sucked since 1999. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with you. And it was just a whole thing. But yeah, no, the enthusiasm was immediately up to 10. And I remember the second teaser, we saw the Falcon just doing that cool camera bending trick. And oh man, you couldn't get away from it. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was replaying it. And it's ignorant of me to say that it like boosted the reaction genre. It definitely made me aware of the reaction genre. And so I can't speak to how established it was before that time. Mm-hmm. But I know that a lot of people jumped on board after that, myself included.
Yeah, absolutely.
Started realizing it was a thing, and now it's like it's a primary form of recreation for me. Like instead of watching TV, sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to watch some reactions to some of my favorite shows. Like that's right. It's fun.
Exactly. Yeah, I do the same thing. I mean, obviously I work in this space, very heavily now. And now when I sit down to eat, at lunch or something like that, I usually throw on a reaction as opposed to like a new show. It also helps when you have a significant other, because then you can save the new stuff for each other and just revisit old stuff on your own if you have to like sit down and watch something by yourself.
That's very valid. That's a very valid point.
Like I said, our good friends Late to the Party, they also started their channel with a reaction to The Force Awakens. That was how they started. They sat down with a lamp in their face and a camera in the other hand and just started rolling. And, now here they are many years later, one of the staples of, I think, the reaction space that I'm very proud to know. And that era of everyone kind of, discovering Star Wars again, the internet, culture around Star Wars in a new light, not just the way it was, back in the 2000s, it went through the forums, stuff like that. It was such like an important moment. Like you said, almost like, where were you? I remember myself as well. Like where I was working, I was doing an after school editing program for my old high school. And I was speaking to one of the other instructors there, and he was like, "Oh, did you hear this? Like Disney just bought Star Wars." And I was like, "Oh, that's crazy," and it was insane at the time, because at the time I wasn't into the extended universe. I wasn't into the books or the comics like that. I was mainly into like the main stuff, visual medium of shows and films. And so the only thing that existed to me at the time was the Clone Wars series. And so that was when I was thinking like, oh, like that's cool. Like, what could this possibly mean? Like, it didn't even dawn on me yet what the possibilities were for like the extent of how they could expand this thing. And so we got Clone Wars, continuing through that, and then like shortly after Rebels as well. And Rebels being the show that you kind of started with for this channel, reacting to the final three seasons of, not three episodes of season 3 with Twin Suns and the finale for that. When you started that, and then you did the final 3 episodes for that season, were you kind of thinking like, what next? Like, what next do I do for the channel? Like, is there something else like you want to explore? Did you have kind of like a game plan in mind already?
When I really didn't have a game plan when I began. When I posted those first 3 reactions, it was like, okay, the season is done. I guess I'll wait for something to come along and I'll react to that. I really wasn't proactive about it because at the time I wasn't really concerned with growing the channel so much as just sort of like documenting my thoughts and putting them out there. And like, I remember I didn't even tell people to like or subscribe. I was like, people will find it if they care. And if not, like, you do you. Like, I was so like blasé about it.
Yeah.
And then after the reception of those first 3 videos, and I saw the numbers, and I was like, wow, there's actually like an audience for this kind of. I started looking for more things to react to. And that's when I discovered that Star Wars fan films like is just this massive untapped resource of just endless Star Wars. And there's so much to talk about there. And people that make fan films are so willing to discuss them and like talk about the intricacies in the filmmaking process and all these things. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there's my niche. I'm going to review all the Star Wars fan films and like talk about what's awesome about them and give shout outs to smaller creators. And that kind of became my focus, like in between seasons of The Mandalorian to react to, or like the big flagship shows. I discovered like just this massive community of fan filmmakers. And that's really became the bread and butter of the content as well. It was like experiencing their passion for the franchise, because Star Wars fan film creators, let me tell you, they are a cut above the rest because Star Wars is such a copyrighted lockdown property. You cannot make a profit off of a Star Wars fan film. It just can't be done. They will come after you and they'll take your knees. So every time you see a Star Wars fan film, and they cost a lot of money to make, let me tell you, that is 100% a passion project. It's a love letter to the franchise, and it's done with such creativity, and they're so inventive, and watching it's just fun to feel like you're part of that process. I love it. They're so fun.
Were the fan films something you were aware of prior to finding them for the channel, or was it like just a totally new culture of you?
They used to do fan film awards, the Fan Network back in like the late '90s, early 2000s, and there were some classics like Troops and the Pink 5 series. There were a bunch, and like definitely I knew about them. But also this was at a time when like home filmmaking technology was still pretty janky, and so it kind of plateaued in that you can only make so many lightsaber fights until there's a way to until there's a way to like up the ante. And Ryan versus Dorkman had done it all. It was kind of a rediscovery of it because it was, oh wow, like they're using CGI now. They're using actual like this and that. Like fan films have come a long way. Channels like Cinematic Captures using full-blown motion capture suits and then rendering like Unreal environments, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. It blows your mind. If I could go back to 1997 and show my younger self just like someone's budget fan film from 2021 that they made in their garage, it would blow my own mind. Like fan films have gotten so impressive. They really have.
Yeah. Is there I guess, off the top of your head, is there a favorite or like a one that stands out that you'd say of any of those fan films?
At the moment, I'd say my favorite is probably Scorekeeper by Creative Force Films. It is a recreation of Predator, but with a squad of rebel pathfinders being hunted by Bosk in the jungle.
Oh, wow.
And it's, oh man, the Bosk prosthetic effects they're lovely. It's really, really cool. That's on the top of my list. They kind of have a personal touch with theirs because I was actually able to meet these guys last year at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim, and I got to see the Bosk suit up close and personal. So that made it kind of an extra fun experience. But it's an excellent fan film.
Okay.
On the other end of that, I'd say Troops, which came out in 1997. It's one of the oldest fan films. And it's cops. It's a cops parody, but it's stormtroopers like on Tatooine messing with a bunch of Jawas. It's short and sweet, but I think it really gets to the heart of what a fan film is. It doesn't have to be flashy. It can be the most basic thing, but if it conveys the Star Wars vibe, mission accomplished.
All right. Yeah, I mean, like just covering all those fan films on the channel, like, along with like comics and reviews and kind of like small video essays that you did in the early year that you started. You were started rolling pretty quickly within the first half of that year, and then around, I think, July it was, Bendu came onto the channel, and he started joining you for a video here and there. Then he eventually joined you, I think, sort of full time for the Rebel season 4 premiere.
Co-reactor. Yeah.
Yeah, was he? I mean, I know he's a good friend of yours. I guess what I want to ask, like, how long have you guys been friends? Like, what's the history there between you two?
So Bendu and I met probably 2004, 2005. Yeah, we go way back. We met at a parkour meetup, which is like the most 2005 thing you can possibly do. I was there rocking some fresh K-Swiss shoes, trying to run along a wall. And he was trying to run along the wall too. And he was like, hey, you should do it from this angle, man. And I was like, yeah. And then we were friends. And then it was actually like, we became friends first and then found out that we were both crazy about Star Wars, like, after the fact.
Yeah.
It came up several conversations in, and then we went over to his house and like read all of his Dark Horse comics. Like, that's
nice.
That's how it all started. And I told him when I started making the YouTube channel, I was like, dude, I'm making a YouTube channel and like making videos about Star Wars. You should come on sometime. And it was just sort of this standing invitation. And then just a couple months in, he just finally took me up on it, had a good time, decided to come back for another one. And then I think it was when season 4 of Rebels started, was on its way. I approached him and I was like, do you want to commit to coming over to my house once a week and we'll record this thing? Yeah. And that's kind of where it started. And like, there was no official like invitation. Bendu, you are hereby like invited to join the. I was just like, hey, bro, come on over. We'll watch some Star Wars. Let's do it same time every week, and we'll film it. And he's like, yeah, that sounds chill. Like, it was all very casual, because at the time Rebels was out, The Force Awakens had dropped, The Last Jedi wasn't quite like it was on the horizon, but we didn't know much about it. Right. And so I didn't really have the projection of how much Star Wars content was going to be dropping over the next few years. Multiple live action series shows, multiple spin-off movies like Rogue One and Solo and everything after that. Comics, like the comics really ramped up the following year, with Marvel, starting with Skywalker Strikes and the Vader trilogy. Like, we hadn't really been getting steady Star Wars comics in a long time before the buyout either. So in my mind, we were going to get like a movie every other year and maybe another animated show. And I was like, that's not really enough to stretch an entire channel around reacting to. And then once I saw the writing on the wall, I think it was the Disney Investors Day stream when Kathleen Kennedy announced that we're doing multiple of everything. I was like, oh, okay, I should clear my schedule. I'm going to be watching a lot of Star Wars.
Yeah.
So really, as long as the Star Wars doesn't dry up, I'm going to have no shortage of things to talk about, react to, and like give my thoughts on and share with other Star Wars fans. And so this, like, I don't know, people balk at the expression, but I think this is the best time to be a Star Wars fan that there has ever been. Even if you don't love all the content, you have so much more content to choose from, and no one's twisting your arm and making you watch the stuff you don't like, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's how I felt about it, when like, again, coming into The Force Awakens and like what was on the horizon. Just as someone who wasn't into the extended universe at the time, I only knew the Clone Wars series, and so I was thinking like, yes, like I was so excited about the idea of having like a landscape of things to enjoy from Star Wars, like this or that live action cartoon, like whatever. It was just like it's so weird to look back at it and just almost seeing like the disparity of stuff that I didn't have yet before the Disney buyout. But you're totally right. It's like the idea is like you might not like everything, but there's enough to look forward to. You can give it another chance. Hopefully you'll get to get on the next one, like whatever. So
I want to ask, like a charcuterie board. There's no rule saying you have to eat every piece of cheese, like every kind of cheese on there.
Yeah, exactly. And so like you said, getting into like that first year of your channel, which is 2017, that year, December, is when The Last Jedi comes out. And that is when things, truth be told, kind of shifts for the fandom, the culture, everything around it. Without, I guess, getting too deep into the PTSD of it all. What was your experience? I guess, like, watching The Last Jedi yourself, what you thought about it at the time, and then, but also how you felt around like the kind of shift the wave that came after of like what people were starting to feel about the franchise in general?
Sure. It's a loaded question that I will tread carefully as I answer, because I do have my own takeaways of how it all shook out, and not everyone agrees with everyone else's opinions on what it all means, and I don't mean to invalidate anyone's opinion. So, I can only speak for myself and my takeaways here. But in the theater, I loved it. I did kind of see the writing on the wall, and it didn't really affect my experience in watching it, but I did have meta thoughts of like, oh, that's not going to go over with some people, or like, oh, some people aren't going to like that. It didn't take away from my fan experience, but it did kind of give me that lump in my throat of like, I'm not looking forward to getting on Twitter and talking about this movie later. I think that Star Wars has been unfairly sucked into a culture war that it has nothing to do with, frankly. I think 2017 is hot off the heels of another year that was very changing the landscape politically and socially and culturally, and that's 2016 when, things happened. We won't really get into that because that's not what this interview is about, but I think that has a direct correlation to the way Star Wars suddenly had to be manly men for men, and like women had to be a certain way. And if a woman is empowered on the screen, she's a Mary Sue, and like everything is now pandering and woke, and all these buzzwords started coming out. And ironically, these same buzzwords are being parroted by other groups way outside of Star Wars.
Yeah.
One observation that I made during the nightmarish discourse that kind of just sort of unraveled, I would say it's still rocky road, but it's on a much more even keel than it used to be. The dust has cleared. Years have gone by, but it's still really charged when you try to talk about that movie in particular. It almost always spirals out of control into sub-arguments, especially on Twitter. Twitter is not really conducive to having civil discussions because tone of voice means everything. And if all you have is text, like, no one's really hearing what other people are saying.
Right.
But no, I will say that a lot of people suddenly came out of the woodwork decrying the direction Star Wars is going in, talking about how they were lifelong fans, walking away from the franchise because of this, because of that choice, because of Kathleen Kennedy. And multiple times I would go to those people and like scroll through and be like, what have you ever shared? What have you ever expressed about Star Wars before this tweet? Crickets. Yeah. It's like none of these people have opinions until suddenly they have all the opinions. It's like, well, where were you when we were watching Star Wars 10 years ago and talking about this? Like, why are you suddenly wading in? These people are all suddenly jumping in that maybe they've been fans their whole lives, but they've never been represented in the discourse before. But now it's suddenly urgently important for everyone to talk about why it's not manly anymore. Why it's, no, Star Wars is for girls now. Why, like, the Force is female. First of all, that was a Nike ad. But secondly, like, why did that enrage people? Why are we so upset about things? It's fake and in space. It doesn't stop me from loving it for 30 years, but I can acknowledge when parts of it aren't designed for me anymore because I'm old and hairy now. It's for the kids, you know?
Yeah.
There's Star Wars for us. There's also Star Wars that's not for us. And I think that when you grow up loving something, I'm a perfect example of this, you can start to feel a certain level of entitlement and ownership of that because you're protective of this thing. You love it. And when someone else is now making Star Wars movies that's not George Lucas, who you have also grown up with as the Star Wars guy, and now we've got this J.J. Abrams person or Rian Johnson, it's like someone else has taken out your Star Wars toys and started playing with them in front of you. And you're like, no, Darth Vader doesn't do that. He does this. Like, you're playing with them wrong. Like, that's kind of the feeling that you get. And I think it's very important if you want to maintain a healthy relationship with media to divorce yourself of that feeling because you don't actually own it. You own your version of it, but it's perfectly okay for someone else to tell their version, you know?
Yes.
And I think that gets thrown to the wayside a lot of times when people talk about why things are objectively bad. It's like, well, it's not what you wanted, and that's valid and that's fair. Doesn't make it objectively bad.
Right. Very well said. Like very, very well articulated in a.
Unfortunately, I've had a lot of time to think about this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so similar to that, though, I want to ask, just navigating the space of, the current culture of like fandom, stuff like that, Star Wars or not, being a creator, like, again, you said you have this kind of platform, this space where you have to articulate yourself and these thoughts pretty frequently. And with that, you get responses, pushback, you should open yourself up to the discourse in a way that some people don't, because they aren't in front of a camera constantly to do this.
I am kind of throwing myself to the wolves by doing it every time. It's a choice I make. I can't really blame anyone for whatever the reaction might be.
Are there any philosophies you have to yourself, even like say when you sit down, you're going to turn the camera on, you're going to post a tweet, anything that you kind of like, a mantra of any sort that you tell yourself, like just to keep yourself, in a good headspace when sort of dealing with these things?
I mean, nothing too specific. As a typical rule, as a typical philosophy for when conducting myself online, because I really am putting myself into a microscope, is to be authentic and to just be honest. Because if I try to manufacture a point of view that's not really what I have, it's exhausting to maintain that, and having to then like refer back to it and keep everything straight. And it's inauthentic, and people can tell. You can always tell when someone's forcing something. And I think I just am very fortunate to have a really real enthusiasm for a subject matter, and people find it engaging because they can tell that I actually am getting really excited about something, and I have very strong reactions to certain things. But my only real philosophy is like, would I say this in an actual room full of people? Because oftentimes when you're talking on Twitter, you're alone somewhere, and the anonymity of no one can hear your voice, like, half the things that we say, like if you imagine people's heads turning as you say it and looking at you, would you still say it? If the answer is no, don't tweet that thing, because that's literally what happens. You just don't actually see that reaction happen. And now that Twitter has added view counts, we are forced to be confronted with when that happens. But I'd say just be honest and be kind. Don't misrepresent yourself, because people will always come with the receipts,
All right.
You, as a YouTuber, a content creator in general, but especially a YouTuber, you're living your life on a camera, and you're documenting intimate parts of your life that other people sort of just keep to themselves. And you are inviting a level of scrutiny because of that too. If it bothered me, if negative comments bothered me, I probably wouldn't do this.
Right.
I don't imagine they're going to suddenly magically start bothering me one day. So going back to what my day job was, I was the manager of security. I was a head bouncer for a bar. So it takes a lot to make me blink. It takes a lot to make me blush. I've been called the worst that professionals can think of. And I feel like in a way that subconsciously conditioned me for putting myself in the public eye in this way, is that like, I can take it. I've been like, people have tried to stab me before. Yeah, you can call me a jerk. It's not going to matter to me.
So with that, I mean, I see that you're also one of the kind of vocal proponents of certain aspects of the fandom, where like you are not afraid to speak your mind to certain people that I think you disagree with, on not necessarily like an opinionated level, but like a moral level, but the way they choose to conduct themselves and their opinions towards others.
I think that's fair to say. I think that when you have a platform, there is a moral responsibility that comes with that. And if I see someone with any level of a platform abusing that, for example, I would be abusing my own platform if I didn't weigh in. I feel like I don't know. It's something akin to being a mandated reporter. It's like, if I see this happen and choose not to act, it's as bad as if I did it myself.
Right.
And if I see, like, I will see people, and like, I don't know, I consider 1,000 followers to be a platform. Like, that's 1,000 people. That's 1,000 people listening to whatever you have to say. And if you have a disagreement with someone on social media and you try to send your followers after that person, like, I'm going to step in and be like, this is inappropriate. Like, no one should be doing this. I don't look for arguments. I really don't like arguing with people. I think that we should all be able to just civilly discuss things together. But at the same time, like, self-respect is a thing. I'm not a doormat. Yeah. I won't suffer a fool if I don't have to. If you're being annoying, I'm going to tell you to go away. I think the best philosophy is just disengage. You don't need to respond. No one needs to be a reply guy. If someone is trying to get a rise out of you, just don't rise to it. Don't give them what they want. Yeah. There's a reason. There's a very pointed reason why in my content I really don't focus on the negative. I will criticize things, but I don't go on and on about things that I don't like, and that's just a personal choice because I put my energy into things that I do like. And I would rather spend my time and my focus talking about what I appreciate about a piece of media rather than, well, I hated this and I hated that. I'll touch on those things if they're there. If I hate something, you're going to hear about it, but then I'm going to move on to the rest of it and spend the rest of whatever we're talking about on the things I do like, because that's just where I'd prefer to put my focus. And it is difficult these days with the current cultural climate surrounding YouTube, specifically Star Wars YouTube. Actually, when people find out that I'm a Star Wars YouTuber, that paints a specific, like a certain picture that it has connotations now that don't fairly apply to me. And I don't like that I have to specify. It's like I became a Star Wars YouTuber so that it was already niche. It's already, and now within that, there's a subculture that I have to like make myself distinct from. It's like, I'm not a grifter. All right. I don't do I'm not Mike Zero out here with the thumbnails. The man is a thumbnail artist. No one can take that away from him. But like, yeah, it's like, I'm a Star Wars YouTuber. Oh, do you rail about Kathleen Kennedy with tinfoil on your head? It's like, no, not that kind. The other kind of Star Wars YouTuber.
Yeah.
There are dozens of us.
Yeah. Oh, for today, I was watching Alex and Molly Damon from Star Wars Explained put together a Lego ship or something. And they were talking about the same exact thing. They're talking about the same exact thing. Like, they are aware of, like, it's like the culture of like Star Wars YouTubers that they kind of inadvertently rub shoulders with, because of just like being in this space is like how you are associated with that sort of connotation, as you say. And they were saying the exact same thing. It's like you have to decide what you want to focus on, because that will determine like how you are like enjoying your life, how you're enjoying the content that you're consuming. If you choose to just be negative about it all the time in a way where it's like is sort of manufactured, you say, is untrue to yourself, because it gets views, it gets likes, clicks, like all the easy stuff, like it's gonna kind of drive you up the wall, and it puts you like in like a hole of like that you can't really get out of. If so for yourself, like I think that's really something that I think lets people gravitate towards your channel, and it's definitely why I gravitated towards it when you reached out to me. So like, hey, like I heard from a friend of a friend that you edit YouTube videos, like, would you be interested in editing for me? And like, I always had to do my due diligence to like, learn about the people that I want to speak to and work with. And like, you were quickly someone that I watched and I was like, yes, like this is someone who, yes, like I really respect in the way you carry yourself on the channel in your opinions. Even if it's stuff that you are saying like you disagree with or isn't to your liking, you still hold yourself in a very respectful way that I admire very much so in this space. So it was funny that I did a few edits for you for Star Wars. It was The Mandalorian season 2, which we got started with.
That's where we started.
And then shortly after that, you informed me that you had another channel, the Grizzle Wizard channel. You're like, can you do Avatar reactions as well? And I was like, oh, I didn't know you had another channel where you're doing a completely different thing.
Kind of it's less of a curated YouTube channel like Kyle Katarn, and more of like a serial killer's dumping ground, where it's just random videos are just dropped with no explanation, and then months go by, and then another one is discovered. Like,
yeah, I wanted to ask. So, what was the logic of like creating the second channel? Because I clearly, Kyle Katarn is for Star Wars, sure, but
that was pretty much the essence of it. I didn't want to water down the niche of Kyle Katarn being Star Wars only, and I did want to try and branch out, because again, there is an effort to try and round myself out as a person, and I'm not just all about Star Wars. I'm also a big fantasy nerd, and I like all kinds of video games and things. And I thought, well, if I can try and express that and get that off of the ground, then I could, just have 2 successful channels, because there's all kinds of things out there that I'd love to be able to react to and not necessarily keep myself in the box of Star Wars. I love Star Wars, and I've chosen it as a niche, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be constrained by it. So Grizzled Wizard exists sort of to give me the freedom to engage with any sort of media that I want to. And Avatar got a huge reception. People love those Avatar reactions, and I'm currently working my way through Legend of Korra right now. Should be hitting Patreon soon.
Yeah. On Grizzled Wizard, you've done Legend of Korra, like He-Man, Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, lots of fantasy adventure type genre stuff. I want to ask, like, is there any other, besides Star Wars, you said Lord of the Rings, are there any other franchises, IPs that you feel very fond of in a similar manner?
In terms of fantasy, there's quite a few actually. Like I'm a big fan of the Dark Crystal, both the original movie and the Age of Resistance, which was the Netflix series that came out. Big fan of that. Willow, the Willow series on Disney Plus was also great. I grew up watching the Willow movie. That's my love for that goes back just as far as Star Wars. Actually, we had the VHS of Willow. We watched it so many times. Me and my sisters on long car trips would like say every line from the movie. We would just like do the whole movie while we're sitting in the back seats because we had all the dialogue memorized. It was great. My parents hated it. But Willow for sure. Lord of the Rings, not just because I love the movies, but also because I have family ties to the production itself. Like it's got a very special place in my heart that I think will never be touched by anything else. I'm a big fan of adult animation too. I like a lot of Adult Swim series. Metalocalypse, Death Clock. I'm back in the day. I'm a huge fan of Death Clock. I love that show. Tigtone, more recently. Tigtone came out a number of years ago. That was really fun too. Big fan of Dungeons and Dragons. Have not seen the new movie yet. That also I'm planning to react to. Hopefully I can get Bendu on side for that one. Because we played D&D together many times.
Yeah.
But yeah, my interests are very various. I just only have a Star Wars collection. So I was like, well, I might as well make a Star Wars channel, right?
Yeah. I guess with that though, like, so you with Star Wars, like you said, you have like a lot of, large collection of things you've kind of, put together over the years for yourself and for the channel, the presentation of it. I want to ask, like, is there something in Star Wars that you, Disney, canon or not, that you enjoy enough, but you kind of, if you had your way, you maybe would have like kind of pushed it in a different direction, a different trajectory, not to diminish the quality of like what has been, made.
No,
by
for sure. No, totally.
Powers that be.
That's a good question. I mean, I always have my own interpretations of how I would have done things differently. To pick out a single like piece of it though, and say, this is the one I'd change. That's hard to do. For me, it would be more of like an overall, like I would have changed this character's arc throughout these two different shows in a movie or something like that. Well, for one thing, I would have continued the story of Solo, a Star Wars story, and I would have had Maul not just randomly show up at the end like that, but give a little bit more context to it, and then let him become like, I'm sure the plan was always to have him be like a major player in the sequel. I think a lot of the War of the Bounty Hunters storylines with Crimson Dawn ended up playing out in the comic books was what they intended for the sequel. But I would just go back and see. It's hard to answer that, man. That's a tough one, because the short answer is yes. There are a lot of things that I would change, but off the top of my head, I can't really. I don't know. I would say go back to the sequel trilogy and add Luke clone, the goofiest part of Dark Empire. Just double down on it. That's a really good question, though. That is a really good question, because there's always, everyone has their own interpretation, and like if they were in the director's chair, it's like, well, this would have happened or that would have happened.
Yeah.
I would have probably killed more characters.
Really?
Yeah, I would probably have killed like twice as many characters per movie just to keep those stakes high. Give it a little bit of that Game of Thrones energy.
Yes, and so now you've you're managing two channels, and you have a good number of subscribers and dedicated following, really, thanks to just your dedication to the channel and like your brand of Kyle Katarn, Star Wars fans. Yes. My good friend Greg Alba from the Real Rejects, he said that once they hit like a certain amount of subscribers, for them it was like 1 million, but like for everyone milestones are different. He said that he got to that point and he felt like they finally had what he felt was forward momentum, in the sense that they weren't trying to stay above water and trying to just like get past like certain numbers to make themselves comfortable to keep going and try new things. For yourself, like, do you feel like any sort of like accomplishment at this point where you felt like you are now kind of coasting on like a good sort of pattern, or do you feel like you're still in a building stage for yourself?
A little bit of both. I think I'm finally starting to enter a comfortable zone where I get a baseline number of views that I'm pretty happy with. But I think I see, and Greg used the exact same language that I use too, is the forward momentum once you reach a certain milestone of subscribers. And I'm sitting at 41,000 right now, and I am hoping 50K is going to be the milestone that starts that ball rolling back down the hill again and picking up speed. Maybe it'll be 100K. Maybe it's the three digits. But I still find myself in a period of waiting for that to really kick off. But I feel like I am slowly arriving at that place, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, would you say, because I always tell everyone, when you start these things, you have to do them, like you said, in an authentic way. You have to make sure that the gratification you're getting out of it is like very personal. It has to be an outlet for you. But you have to enjoy it on a very personal level before it can be like a business or any sort of sense like that. Beyond any monetary value, right now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your channel for yourself?
Well, that's actually pretty easy to answer. I've met a lot of very good friends through doing YouTube. A lot of people that live far away from me that I would never otherwise have come into contact with. If it wasn't for doing YouTube, I would probably never have ended up going to Star Wars Celebration and Galaxy's Edge and having so much networking to do and already have a basis for familiarity with so many of these people. YouTube especially, but content creation on social media in general really is like has this very real, intense social aspect that really kind of has to be experienced rather than described. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that I get out of it is that I've met so many people that I can consider to be my friends. Like, because of YouTube, I now have a guild in Star Wars: The Old Republic, and we do live content on Twitch every Sunday. We have over 50 members in the guild. And I would count many of them among my friends, and I would hang out with them in person if they didn't all live in Europe. We're all planning to drink a bunch of sake together in Japan in 2025 for the next Star Wars celebration. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that is a great point to kind of wrap this interview up on, is the community and the friends we find along the way. That old chestnut. So I have our final questionnaire, which is inspired by the James Lipton, final questionnaire from inside the Action Studio. Just kind of like 10 sort of rapid fire questions of just off the top of your head, what comes first.
Boom. Okay.
So
take a big pull of this first. Give me some brain power.
Yes. It was a very, very inspirational show for me inside the Action Studio. So just first question, what is your favorite TV show? Period.
Currently, I would say Firefly.
Firefly? Okay. What is your favorite film?
Favorite film of all time? Babe 2 Pig in the City. I know, that was lit. That was kind of a curveball, huh?
Yeah. What stresses you out?
Connectivity issues.
Yeah.
OBS crashing. Videos getting blocked without a clear explanation why.
And what relaxes you? What helps you relax?
Doing nothing. Honestly, I'm a big fan of downtime. Like, maybe have some music going. Like, not necessarily anything on the screen. Just sit there and like chill, quiet my mind. Meditation basically relaxes me very well.
Right. What media outside of film and TV do you enjoy the most?
Probably music. As a musician, yeah, music.
And what media do you think you would probably enjoy the least?
Huh. That's tricky.
Not in terms of dislike, but just terms of ones that you may not
last on the list.
To.
No, totally.
Yeah.
I would say stage theater, just because I haven't been to a play in a really long time, but I actually really like plays. So I'm gonna go with. Actually, that doesn't count as media, does it? Because that's a stage performance anyway. DVDs, never did care for them.
For physical media?
Yeah, for physical media, yeah.
Yeah.
Although I am a big proponent of owning physical media. Streaming services should not own the stuff that we're paying for. If you can, put something on your shelf.
Yeah. What is your guilty pleasure of anything? Anything. Food, music, movies, whatever.
Oh, I already answered that one. Babe 2 Pig in the City.
What film or show do you wish you could go back and erase your memory of to react for the first time?
Ooh, that's a good one. What really blew my mind? What had a crazy twist in it? I think watching The Departed for the first time.
Really?
Yeah, that elevator scene at the end, like, didn't see it coming, blew my mind. I would love to watch that again for the first time, actually. Yeah, Scorsese's great.
That's a great pick. I think, lots of those would be a great pick. What advice would you give yourself, your past self, that was starting this channel?
I would say do more research, make more connections early on, like start the networking. Like I was kind of an island for the first like 3 full years of doing this. I didn't really communicate with any other creators. And as soon as I did, it was largely beneficial, not just for technical knowledge and sharing of expertise, but also just entering into the community. Like we could all like share and promote each other's content, and suddenly like we could, all these viewer bases sort of like collide and come together. And so reach out to other creators. Don't be afraid to ask people how they do certain things. A lot of the things I've learned has just been from cold contacting, like someone whose video I liked and was like, hey, I watched this video. How did you do that? And like people will respond. You never know. Yeah. Fortune favors the bold. So take risks, reach out to people, do your research, and don't just buy the first damn thing that's like marked down on Amazon, Kyle. I had a bad webcam for the first like year. It was not good.
Yeah. Is there any unique or different advice you'd give to just anyone else that's starting right now?
I would say, I don't know, just have fun. Again, be authentic and genuine. Don't try to force an opinion one way or the other. And people see right through it. Don't try to just follow what you think public opinion wants to hear. Be true to your own opinions. And if you have something worth sharing, people will stick around and listen to it. Don't be concerned with your subscriber counts when you're first starting out. Be concerned with the quality of your content. If you're making something worth watching, people will come and watch it. That's where your focus should be. The video itself.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me,
and
man.
sharing your thoughts, everything about this. Where can everyone find you online, YouTube, social media, otherwise? Where can they find you?
I am on YouTube as Kyle Katarn. I am on Twitter as Kyle Katarn, but the L is a 1. I am on Twitch at Kyle Katarn Official and Patreon at Kyle Katarn Channel. I think that's all. Oh, I'm also on Instagram as Kyle Katarn with a 1 for the L. And I think that's all of my socials, and I update them all fairly frequently. I don't have there's also a Discord server, which doesn't have a fancy, snappy title, but there's a link to it on all of my other socials. That's where all of the community is located. When we go live for any of our streams that have multiplayer aspects, we do all of our matchmaking on there, all of our coordination and stuff through there. It really is the best way to get a hold of me, and people like to send me fan films and things to react to through there as well. That's actually a big point that I didn't really bring up, is that the community element of the channel helps to sustain it as well, because I no longer have to spend time searching on YouTube for things to react to. I now have a list that is insurmountably long on my Discord server, and I can just chip away at that until Kingdom Come. There's so many fan films people have scoured and sent to me. So they really make my job so much easier, having a community. So yeah, that would be the biggest piece of advice. Also, you can chop that in. The biggest piece of advice that I would give to a creator starting out is build a community. Have somewhere to center it, whether it's in the comments of your videos or a Discord server, which is my preferred way of doing it. Have a core cast of people that keep coming back to the conversation. Find a way to keep people engaged, and they will tell their friends about it, and eventually they will help you grow the platform. So it's all about building a community at the end of the day.
Perfect. Perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us, and we will catch you guys on the next interview. Have a great one.
And if I may the Force be with you.